The Boston Globe Spotlight Team, famous for its investigation of sexual abuse in the Catholic Church, has now turned its focus on another explosive issue: racism in Boston. The multi-part series set out to answer the question, is Boston a racist city? Tonight, Boston: racism, image, reality. Welcome to our 50th season of Basic Black. Some of you are joining us on our live broadcast, and others of you are joining us on Facebook Live. I'm Callie Crossley, host of Under the Radar 89.7. Joining me tonight are Tanisha Sullivan, president of the Boston NAACP; Akilah Johnson, reporter and member of the Spotlight team at the Boston Globe; Renee Graham, associate editor and columnist for the Boston Globe's op-ed page; and Phillip Martin, senior investigative reporter, WGBH. Welcome to you all.
Thank you, Kelly.
Well, here's how I'd like to start, because there was a multi-part series for people who have yet to read it, touched on every arena in city life in Boston. So I'm going to go around, start with you, Phillip, and I'd like to know the one piece of data that struck you and why.
There were a lot of data, but one that really struck me was not you might think it might be that about wealth, the aggregate wealth of blacks being only $8. But what struck me actually was the Seaport story. The fact that $18 billion was invested, public money, in the Seaport area, and that you have virtually no black communities in that area. Now, the reason that struck me, of course, is precisely because you can plan a neighborhood. And that planning should have included room for diversity of class and race. And so that is what struck me, especially when you consider that when city officials talk about the Seaport area, they talk about it as the possibility of inclusion as opposed to the reality of inclusion, and there is not, that reality doesn't exist right now. And when you look, especially when you compare that to Baltimore, where 13% of the Inner Harbor, similar areas to Seaport, are black folk. And even that is a far cry from the number of people represented in the city of Baltimore. But Boston is considerably worse.
Okay. Tanisha.
I agree with Phillip on that point. The Seaport installment was striking to me as well, because that was an opportunity to get it right.
That's right.
And we missed it. And we missed it because there was not great intentionality when it came to inclusion on the Seaport. We have to look at the Seaport as not only where we got it wrong, but also where potentially in the future we can get it right. But for me, one of the other installments that struck me was the one on our colleges and universities, and specifically as it relates to the diversity of black students. From Harvard to BU to Northeastern, the data there that showed that we've seen either no increase in the diversity of black students on some of these campuses, and in the instance of Northeastern, actually a decline. Yet at the same time, most of these institutions are touting diversity and increased diversity on the campuses. That was deeply troubling to me. That's an area where, quite frankly, we haven't spent a lot of time, and when we think about really the benefits that our colleges and universities are receiving through pilot programs, right? Payment in lieu of taxes programs, the benefits that they're receiving from the city, yet the young people, the black and brown people who are living here, whose families are here, are not being able to access these great institutions as other students are. That was concerning to me.
And just to be clear, the diversity they're touting is from international students now, right?
Yes.
Just so people understand.
But I think that's part of the challenge with the diversity conversation, when we're not specific about what we mean. And this particular data point showed that in fact black students are not benefiting from the diversity initiatives that these colleges and universities are touting.
Okay, Renee.
I agree with Tanisha. It was the piece about universities and colleges that really surprised me. You know, if you think about a city like Boston, and you've got some of the best institutions in the world in this city, you can't get black students to come here. And if they do, they're not staying. So what you don't get is this injection of youth and new ideas coming into the city, because either they're not coming or they can't keep them here. Right. And Boston's made a big point of trying to hang on to its college students. So that all these campaigns, they're building micro apartments so people can afford to live here. But they're still not attracting black students. So you're never going to sort of move out. You're not going to get a new generation coming in to kind of change the face of Boston because they're not here. And when they are here, they won't stay.
So now you worked on the series, Akilah,
Yes, I
so
did.
you immersed yourself in all of the data collection and the storytelling. Is there one thing that stood out for you?
Right, it's hard to kind of narrow it to one thing, but there were, so I'm going to cheat because there are like two kind of data points that really stuck with me throughout the reporting of the project. And one had to do when you look at black enclaves in the greater Boston area, or shall I say the lack thereof black enclaves in the greater Boston area. And by black enclaves, we mean kind of thriving, prosperous, black neighborhoods in this area. And in our greater area, there are 45 other metropolitan areas that have more thriving, prosperous black neighborhoods than greater Boston. And I mean, we, as you all have touched on, we're an area that really kind of holds itself up, touts itself up as a world-class city in league with the other major metropolitan areas in the country. And, we're one of the 10 largest, and yet and still there's 4. I mean, to me, that was shocking. And, some people say, well, why does that matter, right? This became kind of a big, I don't call it negotiating point, but topic of conversation throughout the reporting, writing, and editing. Like, okay, so what, and even the feedback from people. So what is the significance of having a black neighborhood? Isn't that reverse segregation? Isn't the goal supposed to be inclusion? Isn't the goal supposed to be that everybody can kind of live where they want? Wasn't that the dream of the civil rights movement? And what struck me is just how few people seem to really be familiar with what the civil rights movement was about, and that folks weren't fighting to integrate neighborhoods, but folks were fighting to have the same access to opportunities, and the lack of that access that exists in Boston as shown through 4 black enclaves compared to like 150 in New York, or, over 100 in Atlanta or DC. There are places like cities in Columbus, in Ohio, have more black enclaves than we do here in the greater Boston area. And I think I just found that really telling.
I think I just want to say, when I saw the piece on black enclaves, a lot of people I knew, and myself included, we were shocked that there were even 4. We thought that was actually a sense of progress. We thought there were far fewer, if any. So that doesn't say many good things about the city.
Well, Akilah, the question was, is Boston a racist city, which is the reputation that the city has had for a long time, some of it attributed just to busing, but there are other concerns going on. And you say, really what the series proved is that Boston deserves that.
Boston definitely deserves its racist reputation, right? And so it becomes very complicated to say, well, is Boston racist? Because you could say, is insert name of major and or minor American city racist? And by and large, people are going to say, yes, full stop, period. And so to really kind of delve into the complexities of the issue, it goes beyond just saying, is it racist or not, right? So does it deserve its racist reputation and the things that contribute to that? Just in the sense of Boston being so white dominated, at 3 out of every 4 people in greater Boston are white compared to, places like San Francisco, for instance, where you may only have like 7% of the population is black, but it is not a white-dominated city, so it doesn't feel so isolating for black people and people of color. And those types of things play into the word-of-mouth reputation of a city, which is kind of what Boston has been exporting, for lack of a better term. And does Boston deserve its racist reputation? Yes, full stop. And some people, I think, have become very uncomfortable with the fact that is the short and sweet of the answer.
Now, of course, the composition, the demographics don't make it a racist city in itself, but what makes it a racist city is the way that power is divided up, or lack of. And as the Boston Globe series pointed out, on corporate boards, when you talk about the universities, the fact that a 1983 study by the Boston Globe some of the same figures are coming up in 2017. That you've made almost no progress between the 4.3 and I think it was 4.3 percent of students in 1983 who were at Boston University, and I think it's, and I may be mistaken about this, but I think it's 4.6 now. It might have been actually by a 1 point difference. Well, that's extraordinary. And what the Globe series did was that type of measurement was really important. It was important to look at so many years apart that the city has made so little progress. Now, one question that continued to come up in the Globe series is it the most racist city?
Yes.
Well, that's problematic.
Right.
Because, for the very reasons
Yes,
that you said, because that's an interesting measurement. Does that mean when you walk down the street you're going to be called the N-word? Is that one aspect of the problem? Or does it mean that when you walk into a job or hoping to get a job in downtown Boston, and because your name is Tamika, as opposed to, let's just say, Maria McCarthy, and your name is Tamika Jones, and someone can tell the difference, or if you're looking for, trying to apply for an apartment, which the Globe did, and your name happens to be Tamika, and you don't get that job, and your name happens to be Maria McCarthy, and you do get that job. Well, it does suggest that there is an incredible variance. But again, is that the most racist city in the world?
Right,
no,
right.
I mean, in the country, it doesn't necessarily prove that. And that is a hard measure.
But here's the thing. Of all of these other cities where you could insert, Boston is the one that will come up if you stop any black person anywhere in the country.
Yes.
I know people in Boston find this hard to believe,
Yeah.
but people call me all the time. Is it as bad as it is?
That's right.
These are people considering moving here.
Yeah.
I mean, any of us have had these experiences.
Yeah.
This is the thing. For me, the thing that I was very, very excited about the series is that there was documentation and data. I am tired of saying the same thing over and over again and having people say, that didn't happen.
Right.
You're exaggerating. You don't know what you're talking about. Okay, maybe that happened to you, but it didn't happen to anybody else, Renee. I mean, and I know you get this too.
I knew people who were very skeptical about the series before it came out. And they read the first section, they were just like, man, we know about this. And I kept saying, it's not for you. You do know this. But there's a lot of white people in Boston who don't know this. And that's why it was important. It was important to talk about going to the seaport, going to different parts of the city, and not seeing faces of color. That's a big part of Boston. Boston is racist, but Boston's also extremely segregated.
Right.
So you can be in downtown Boston, you can be on Newbury Street, you can be in the Back Bay, and you're not going to see a lot of people of color. You're certainly not going to see a lot of black people. The idea that you have to go to certain communities to see a lot of black faces feeds into this idea of Boston being inhospitable to black people.
Or in sports arenas too. And I just want to pick up on something that you said that we've all had happen, I am sure, when somebody comes to visit you and they're out and you forget about it because you're so used to it. Where are the black people? This is the question people ask all
The minute they get to
time.
the airport, I've heard that question. They get off the plane, it's like, where are the black people?
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, we'll get to them soon. You know, but they're not going to see them.
I think one of the bright spots in the piece really was on the economic development side and the reporting relative to the Massport RFP process and the ultimate awarding of the Massport contract. I think that's particularly important because it shows what is possible when there's actually will.
That's right.
And the benefits of that particular process, the economic benefit to communities, to the greater Boston area, black and brown communities, we believe is going to be significant. So the question becomes, where is the will? And I think part of the challenge for our city is that to this point, and we still struggle with it, we've had difficulty acknowledging that there's not only a problem, but also following through with solutions that we know can work.
Well, so let me add something to that because in some places there's plenty of will. But well-intentioned does not lead to action. So let's go back to intentionality, meaning that there has to be action as a part of it. So what's great about the process that Massport put in place vis-a-vis Dwayne Jackson and the board and a lot of other folks working on it is that they said, oh no, we were not even having the conversation unless this is in place. And so as a result of that, what has happened is people who never would have worked together are working together on the project. So what folks said the well-intentioned folks said they want to have happen in terms of black contractors, small firms working with large firms on every level, having folks from every community, every minority community at every level of this project be real, is happening because there was a point that you could not even entertain being a part of it unless you were going to open up in that way.
That's right. And I think that it helps to redefine what we mean when we say well-intentioned.
Exactly.
Right? Because it's no longer enough to say that that diversity is what we want, it's what we're striving for, we're trying. What we have is a very real prototype, a model for doing.
Right.
And so for us, the question becomes, if Massport can do this in a very short period of time, this is what we want to do, we're going to figure out how to make it happen, then how
and
can
by the way, the people are here to do it.
And the people are here to do it. How do we translate that into supplier diversity programs at the city level, right? Where the city has control over their RFP process. How do we turn that into supplier diversity at the state level, where again, the state has control over its supplier diversity or RFP process? So again, I think part of what not only the Massport RFP process showed, but also what the Globe Spotlight series highlighted, is that, again, now it's about what can we do, what will we do, what have we done, versus talking about what we need to do.
And here are the stats that show where all the arenas are that we need to do it. Now, here's one of the criticisms that came up in some of the people responding to it, which I thought, from my perspective, because again, Renee, as you pointed out to me, this was not for me. This is from other people. People got upset because you all went to places and counted.
Okay, so I'm going to get to the counting.
And I'm all about it because that's what I do
you.
everywhere I go.
A few things on the counting. So that goes back to my point about Boston being a white-dominated area. I mean the series has shown, and I think we all know this from our conversations, we are in blue, progressive Massachusetts and Boston. You know, we like to tout and laud ourselves on our kind of progressive bona fides. And I say that to say people have kind of given themselves a pass on some level for having to deal with the intentionality to really change things. And so, and it speaks to a lot of different things. When you talk about diversity, when you talk about inclusion, when you talk about the changing definition of diversity, people will say, oh, well, I go to X, Y, and Z place, which we've pointed out, and I see black people. Okay, but when I go to X, Y, and Z place, and I see black people, I see a black person.
It's usually me.
Or two black people. It's usually me. That does not, diversity and inclusion, that does not make in my mind, right? So it really kind of, I think, holds a mirror up to some folks to say, one or two, you know, groundbreaking racial progress. It is not. And so I think that was very important. And I will say with the counting, I mean, Shonda Rhimes brought it up on the fact that black folks count other black people when they go into a room. Shonda Land has brought it up, right? Like it is a thing that happens that we do. And so
you don't even mean to do it sometimes. You don't even mean to do it. You just do. You just scan the room and you kind of get your numbers right.
But I think another reason for the variance in terms of perception is that when you talk to some folks, when they think about Boston, they're thinking about the raw, brutal fight in the street racism of the 1970s and 80s and part of the 90s. That's one of the concepts that people are thinking of. To ask to look at the broader issue of housing.
Oh, so wait a minute. So let's just get clear. So that's how they're defining racism.
That's how many define racism. Many define racism in the most brutal terms. The N-word, you know, like the fighting in the street. The famous photograph of Ted Landsmark being speared with the American flag in the 1970s. That type of symbolism. And so when you basically see the city, people see the city having evolved, and in many ways it has. There were times when you could not walk into the North End without your car tires being, without being attacked, or drive into the North End if you were black and not have your tires slashed. And that was certainly true in South Boston.
And I still won't go to South Boston unless
And it was
Somebody
certainly
invites
true
me.
at one point in East Boston, and it was certainly true in Charlestown. Those were the neighborhood fiefdoms that people think about when they think about Boston of the 70s and 80s, and again the 90s, and so on and so forth. And so the notion of walking around on a nice sunny day, the Seaport area, and able to enjoy it, and in the North End, listening to all types of music, including the religious festivals. All of a sudden, for many people, that's a sign of progress. But when night comes, you're not in that neighborhood unless you're at the restaurants because you're not living there. When night comes, you're not in the Seaport unless you're at one of the restaurants. And as we pointed out, there are very few people in those.
Working there or eating there.
Or eating there, exactly. And so I think it was the class part of this that was also an important part of the Boston Globe series. You have to talk about class and race concomitantly.
That's right.
Those things cannot be separated. And that is what I think is the perspective that the series offered. Though I think it also could have explored more of the class aspects of this and how that intersects with race.
I agree with you. I mean, as a counter, and I'm sorry to say, which is sad, there are some, I'm a big foodie, so I like to go try all the new restaurants. I show up in a restaurant, and I am actually shocked when I see another black person there, which is sad.
I go to Symphony Hall because I'm a big fan of classical music, and wow, it's pretty white in Symphony Hall. I've never had a problem there. Everyone's very lovely to me, but it's me and maybe 2 or 3 other people, and we kind of know each other by sight now, and we do the nod because, that's the way it is.
Right.
The issue in Boston, again, it's that sense of segregation, that there are these invisible lines you just don't cross. That came up in the healthcare piece. And they were talking about the fact that a lot of black people will go to Boston Medical Center because back in the day, Boston City Hospital was where they could go.
From across town.
From across
Even
town.
if they're closer to it.
Right.
Yes,
So
right,
the sense is
right.
that you still go to those places. And, where people go to the movies, where people eat, where people socialize. There's not a sense there's a whole lot to do. People, there was that anecdote in the series about, if I'm getting it wrong, please correct me, but, a businessman coming here and wanting to take people out in the Seaport, and there was nowhere to go, and they ended up going to the Strand.
And they went to Slade's.
Exactly.
They went
There
to
you go.
I think that was
Slade's.
Ron Homer, right?
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
That's right.
yeah.
It's the Slades.
Yeah.
Best chicken wings
And so
in
we all
town.
kind of went, well, sure, of course that's where you go. But why is that the only place you feel comfortable going? And Boston can't quite shake that. And I think, again, Boston's reputation is formed by what happened in the 70s, but think of how many movies have been made in the last 10 years set in Boston.
Yes.
And where are they set?
Yeah,
It's Cambridge, which, oh, by the way, Hollywood is not Boston.
Right.
It's South Boston.
Right.
It's Dorchester, but only certain parts of Dorchester.
True.
And so you get, or it's, it's going to be Newbury Street, it's going to be the Back Bay.
Or it's
You get this
Charlestown.
you get this limited idea of what Boston is. So, those movies don't do Boston any favors, but Boston's not doing itself any favors in that way either.
Yeah, well, that's all right. And then I don't want to start this conversation. Well, I'm going to start it because, okay. When the president engages the nation in a conversation about racism, because that's where we are now. We are having this conversation about the Boston Globe series in the context of that. So we're going to have to deal with, what is the impact of that as we start thinking about, because even though the series was about racism in Boston, I mean, we're really talking about racism, period, and how various constituencies view it. It's not so bad. I don't recognize it because I see folk when I go. I don't count. We got 1 or 2, 3 people here, so what's the deal? There's all of that going on.
When you have a president who refers to countries as wholes, and refers to, I don't think we're allowed to say that on television, on PBS at least, and when you have a president basically refers to Mexicans as rapists, the type of raw racism I was talking about in the 70s and 80s and 90s, well, it opens up again, where folks really feel they have permission to say that type of thing. And so along with Boston's more sophisticated, if you will, look that obfuscates the racism of the city, you also have a reintroduction of that raw, brutal racism that we experienced of the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And you've heard it on the subways when a young Muslim woman last year was harassed on the subways here in Boston. We've heard it from Sikhs who said they had been condemned and attacked here in the city of Boston. And so it's a double whammy. Both the language and the appearance of raw, brutal racism and the reality of it. And then you also have that class dimension that tends to basically overshadow racism in some ways in Boston. But again, it's part of. And so I think that's what the president's language, what the president's descriptions of people, and his worldview, that's what it's allowing to occur again. And it's not just Boston, of course.
If I could say something really quickly about the Trump comment, if you take out the profanity, it's still just as racist.
Oh, absolutely.
That's right.
Because it was about the people.
It was about the people.
It was about
That's
the
right.
people.
So,
And we know what that
everyone's
meant.
focused on this word he said, and all. That's fine, and it was horrifying. But everything else he said was still offensive and still racist. He didn't start a conversation on race.
No.
He did what Donald Trump does. He said something racist. Donald Trump was racist again, and people are now trying to talk about it and deal with it.
Well, we have more to say, but that's the end of our broadcast. So thanks to all of you for joining me. Stay with us right now as we continue our conversation, however, on Facebook Live.